Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. If you haven't noticed lately, our military leaders have been acting a little strange, at least by historical standards. And what I mean by that is they've been doing something we're not really accustomed to seeing from our military leaders. And that means they've been getting very, very political. We're not accustomed to seeing that because that kind of behavior from our military leaders, that whole blurring of military authority with political authority, that's something that we're used to seeing in places like, I don't know, communist Cuba or some banana republic in Central America. You know, the whole faux military shtick, Fidel Castro liked to, project that whole thing with the beret and the military jacket. Jacket was always neat looking, but, still all communist. The same sort of thing that you saw with Saddam Hussein, right? These military, this whole thing was just all a reminder that these, and not even political parties, these tyrants that were in charge of these countries, they also, because they had all of their military uniforms on and all their medals, they were also in charge of the military, and they wanted citizens to notice that. So in other words, it was like wardrobing. It was a very subtle or not so subtle threat to citizens. Like, hey, we're your political rulers. We have the military might, and you'll do what we tell you to do if you know what's good for you. Now, President Biden's not wearing a beret, or he's not showing up in fatigues just yet, but our military leaders that serve this administration seem to be more and more acting politically and speaking out politically on highly charged topics that are very polarizing. And that's a problem because when a top military officer takes a political position, it makes taking a different or opposing political position for the rank and file really, frankly, uncomfortable and actually dangerous for their career. And it also sends a message to the rank and file that taking political positions is an okay thing to do, which of course it's not. So polarizing political discourse from our military leaders does not help with unit cohesion either. It can't possibly. So it's best to keep politics out of the military. That's a Pandora's box that you do not want to open. And in fact, there's almost nothing that you could start talking about as a high-ranking military leader that would cause more division than politics, particularly in America right now. And an America that's more politically polarized since I don't know when. I don't know when it's been this politically polarized. So we're asking this question: why are our military leaders talking politics, and I mean super hyper partisan politics, a lot lately? The latest example of our military leaders talking super hyper politics is Major General Pat Donahoe. He's with the U.S. Army. His Twitter bio reads, Commanding General, Maneuver Center of Excellence and Fort Benning. Views are my own. Okay, well, you're in your uniform with your medals and your everything else with your verified account. Unlike other generals of the past who did their talking on the battlefield and cut their nose out of politics for the sake of cohesion, Commanding General Pat Donahoe likes to opine on Twitter about a lot of things. He even likes to get into tweet wars with American citizens. It's the kind of thing that you would think is unbefitting, perhaps, of a commanding general like Pat Donahoe, but it's his right. But does that help troop cohesion for him to talk politics? Does it inspire confidence from the average American citizen? Is this where General Donahoe should spend his time? I want to take you through some of his tweets, and you can decide yourself if this is the kind of commanding general that you want leading our men and women in the armed forces. So Commanding General Pat Donahoe tweeted this yesterday, quote, public service announcement, block and report the trolls and the disinformation tinfoil hat team, end quote. So I don't even know how he would describe or define disinformation. What's the disinformation tinfoil hat team? Who are those people? How do you define disinformation? Is it just information you dislike? What is it? It's weird because Donahoe sounds more kind of like an internet troll than he does a high-up member of our armed forces. But besides that tweet being in poor form for a general in the U.S. military, it also seems pretty inappropriate for a military commander to talk about censoring Americans' free speech. And by censoring, I mean you have a member of our government, a high-up military leader who works with the administration, who's encouraging private citizens to go and be the thought police. Orwell was a prophet. Now, the military wants its soldiers vaccinated. That's the official line. There's even been rumors of the military potentially even so much as requiring the jab to serve. That hasn't happened yet. Certainly, Commanding General Pat Donahoe is following orders, trying to do his part to encourage vaccination, which from his other tweets, we can see that he's clearly pro-vaccination, and that's fine, but he's very much pushing that agenda, and he's warning troops of the dangers of the Delta variant. Okay, that's understandable. But it's one thing to warn people about the variant, and it's entirely another thing for a sitting high-up member of the military to encourage people to go after other people and report them and then call them tinfoil hats. Especially, we should point out, when the so-called tinfoil hats, they've kind of been right about a lot. Like lab escape, for instance, right? Remember when that was a quote-unquote tinfoil hat theory? So is Joe Biden a tinfoil hat team member because he now is talking about this? The point is, people should be free to ask questions about coronavirus or any other policy, about vaccinations, the whole 9 yards. That's their right. And the general is sworn to protect that right. But he tweeted his support for the opposite. He's demanding a government official calling for speech suppression by engaging and really, you could say, conscripting civilians to go and carry out his demands. Sounds kind of censorship-y. And he wants people to block and report the trolls. So he's encouraging people to snitch on one another and on soldiers and Americans. And again, who decides what information misinformation is? I mean, who is the arbiter of what is misinformation? Is it Donahoe, I guess? I don't know. You might expect this kind of authoritarian behavior from maybe Jen Psaki or the Biden administration or maybe a member of the Castro family, but from a general in the U.S. military, this isn't what we want to see from our generals, political sniping with citizens on Twitter. Now, we wanted to see if this is just some like one-off tweet from Donahoe, to be fair and blah, blah, blah. In fact, what we actually found on his Twitter timeline is arguably worse. Here's an exchange just a few days ago that Donahoe had with a man named Josh Lippincott. He's a PhD student at Hillsdale, retired Marine, and he had actually tweeted about to General Donahoe because Donahoe was discussing the dangers of the Delta variant and the importance of troops getting vaccinated. He says that he was seeing more troops in the ICU. So Lippincott responded with this tweet saying, quote, General, in Q4 of 2020 alone, there were 26 more suicides than in Q4 2019. There have been 26 COVID deaths total in the DoD. The lockdowns, liberty restrictions, quarantines, and general disruptions of service members' lives is a way bigger killer than the virus. End quote. Nothing at all whatsoever disrespectful about that response to Donahoe from Lippincott. It's a reasonable opinion, backed by facts, by the way. And indeed, there's been just 26 total deaths, according to the Department of Defense, in the military since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, coronavirus is hardly the Black Plague, and lockdowns and restrictions of liberty are actual serious threats, not just to civilians' mental health, but soldiers as well. And this is something Lippincott pointed out in his tweet. In fact, there were 26 more suicides in Q4 2020 than that of 2019 in our military ranks, according to Lippincott. Now, Donahoe may have a different opinion, but there was nothing disrespectful about Lippincott's tweet. The general, however, seems to have gotten, I don't know, did he get marching orders from the Get Vaxxed and Shut Up administration that increasingly isn't interested in any discussion about pandemic policy related to Wuhan? But this tweet exchange gets worse. So there was a bit more back and forth between the two. All of it super respectful for the most part, but apparently, Donahoe didn't like Lippincott's point of view, so he tweeted this, quote, "Hey, Hillsdale, come get your boy," end quote. So apparently, General Pat Donahoe thinks that he's playing Sean Penn in the movie Taps, but far from being some sympathetic character, he's a general in the U.S. military who just called out a U.S. citizen who simply was discussing and trading ideas with him, backed with some stats, discussing why he didn't agree with the military's coronavirus policies. And so Donahoe had to go snitch to Hillsdale, I guess, to try to get him in trouble. You had to go snitch? When you're a commanding general in the U.S. military and you tell a civilian who respectfully offers a different opinion, "Hey, Hillsdale, come get your boy," that means you're a bully, not a hero. You're a person in a position of power. And truthfully, behaving this way towards citizens ought to disqualify such people from actually getting to such positions within the military, because clearly they lack the temperament or self-control to stop themselves from directing threatening-sounding tweets at civilians, right? We don't live in a military dictatorship. We're free to criticize everyone's ideas, including those people who serve in military. It's not an inoculation from any and all criticism. You can simultaneously respect someone's service and also think that they are ridiculously wrong on issues. So let's sum it up. General Pat Donahoe wants people to snitch on other people so they can be suppressed, right? They can get their account shut down. He's a general sworn to protect the First Amendment to our Constitution, and General Donahoe likes to play internet bully against citizens when he doesn't like what those citizens have to say. So I'm wondering if Pat Donahoe would be censured for this behavior. Would he get in trouble? Because going up the chain of command, we see similar demonstrations of this political virtue signaling. Any other person would get in trouble for this stuff. What about General Mark Milley, chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff? Here's General Milley before Congress defending the fact that Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist is suddenly magically on the military reading list. Now, understand that Ibram X. Kendi advocates for discrimination in order to say, fix past discrimination. That's his argument. At any other time in history, advocating for discrimination was, especially based on skin color, was called racism. Kendi is a leading, highly political, critical race theory advocate. He wants America to pay reparations also. And putting Kendi's book on the military reading list is it's not about understanding CRT. It's about wokeifying the military, and Mark Milley knows this. But here he is defending the fact that Ibram X. Kendi is on the reading list for soldiers. Watch.
On the issue of critical race theory, et cetera, I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand, and I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it.
You know, when I think of white rage, I think of skinny trust fund white Anglo-Saxon Protestant socialists who make up Antifa and go around and they burn down black neighborhoods because, you know, they're trying to stick up for Black America somehow. Right? Do you remember all the videos of actual Black Americans in their neighborhoods shouting down white trust fund socialist Antifa members because they exist out there? It's just that cable news doesn't want to show them to you. That's white privilege. So apparently, General Milley obviously does need to read up on critical race theory because it's Marxism put into practice. You're swapping out economic disparity and actually viewing racial identity as a form of disparity. And it's talking about deconstructing our republic because every single bit is flawed, infected with what they call systemic racism. And apparently some people don't understand the difference between systemic and systematic, but we'll ignore that, just like we ignored all the factual inaccuracies with 1619 and Nicole Hannah-Jones, right? No. This is all illiberal garbage that is tearing the country apart, if you haven't noticed. And you obviously haven't read Ibram X. Kendi because advocating for state-sponsored discrimination, General Milley, as Kendi does, is about as un-American, bigoted, and unconstitutional and racist as it gets. Yeah. The last thing that critical race theory is going to do is promote cohesion in the military. It is the opposite of e pluribus unum. It teaches everyone to specifically organize themselves around whatever skin color they are, period, and to promote that as a division with others. It promotes the idea that some soldiers are oppressors and others are oppressed based on nothing more than skin color. It is a recipe for division. It is not cohesion. And isn't it interesting that General Milley suddenly wants to understand white rage, right? You have wokeism infiltrating schools and corporations in the entire Democrat Party and just about every other institution in America. And yes, just by coincidence, General Mark Milley wants to understand white rage, and he's really into reading Ibram X. Kendi because he's very open-minded, like some pot-smoking freshman at Columbia University. Maybe he'll even get a Che Guevara t-shirt so he can continue to peacock his woke bona fides for the Biden administration to see. Now, General Mark Milley couldn't possibly be putting his finger up in the air and gauging where the woke wind is blowing and figuring that he can catch a ride on the back of a movement that he never said one word about until 5 seconds ago. No, that can't be it. Because General Milley is super concerned about white rage. I mean, white rage, says the FBI, is everywhere you turn. Except in Michigan, where they actually had to hatch a plot for Gretchen Whitmer based on it, but that's another issue. It's the biggest threat to America. It's not China, it's not Russia, it's white rage. That's a threat. And General Milley is all over it. Jokes aside, the bigger point here is that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, he's playing politics, and so is General Pat Donahoe. They're virtue signaling obedience to this authoritarian dogma that's coming from the Biden administration. But even worse, they're setting terrible examples as leaders. They're taking sides and polarizing political debates that create hostile work environments for their soldiers. And imagine being a soldier who disagrees with Ibram X. Kendi, who suggests that you have to be racist and have discrimination in order to correct past racism and discrimination. When the Joint Chiefs of Staff says that it's important to read Kendi and parrots that made-up talking point that the Democrats have about white rage, which is so ironic, you're signaling to that soldier that the military is woke and politicized. Or what if you're a rank-and-file soldier who had the virus and that you have natural immunity and you don't feel compelled to take a vaccine? And if you're a soldier and you see your commanding general calling for snitching on people who share so-called misinformation about the virus, which is just the information that Biden administration disagrees with, does that make you feel welcome in the military? And what might a soldier think of a general who calls out a civilian, bullying him online with a tweet that says, "Hey, Hillsdale, come get your boy"? I mean, that's the kind of behavior, really, the generals should model for their soldiers. Our military leaders should know better. They need to be above politics and focused on building up the men and women that we send them for the sake of unity and cohesion, not taking sides. And I don't want to hear it, but Trump did that. Two things: Trump was a politician. He was not a general. And secondly, the media. I mean, do you want to get into the media malpractice? Do you want to talk about how we actually abused FISA courts and allowed some people to violate FARA and conspired with the Kremlin in order to try to advance a dossier that was made up of garbage just so we could spy on American citizens, private American citizens, because they used their free private time to actually advise an interim incoming presidential campaign turned president-elect? And then they were all on social media to get the message out. And many Republicans, I mean, good heavens, many Republicans criticized him anyway. Democrats criticized him. It's ridiculous to compare Trump to someone who is actually in our military, which is supposed to be a nonpartisan institution. I seriously doubt any Democrat's going to criticize Milley or Donahoe. But they should, because this kind of behavior damages not just cohesion, but people's faith in the military, quite frankly, and military leadership. That's one of the last long historical associations that conservatives have had, is appreciation of military and law enforcement. And there are some military leaders that seem hell-bent on breaking that up. Politics from our generals only brings division, and it's worrisome to see that this behavior is happening in military because it quite clearly says something else too. Authoritarianism, it's on the rise in America, and you know it is, because now we have military leaders who are compelled to take this much of a political side. I mean, talking about, and I'm not even getting into the Mattis stuff or anything before then. I mean, endorsing radical leftist views from racists like Ibram X. Kendi, encouraging their soldiers to read and embrace these divisive ideas. It's worth pointing out, too, last point here, that the military has long enjoyed, and as I said, benefited from rural America's support. I wrote in my book, Flyover Nation, it's rural America that sends its daughters and its sons. It's rural America that sends its husbands and its fathers and its brothers to go and serve under people like Milley and Donahoe in our military. It's those men and women that have gone overseas and sacrificed. It's those men and women. In fact, it accounts for some. It's those men and women. It's the majority of people who are enlisting. Rural America loves and supports, and not just rural America, flyover America, but people who are constitutionalists. They appreciate the military. They support their offspring when that offspring chooses to enlist, and more than any other group, to die for America. Rural America has looked the other way and has continued to believe in the military, despite America losing. I mean, you want to talk about foreign policy? Yes, we can also blame a lot of this on the politicians, but any kind of strategy that involves this sort of thinking from Donahoe or Milley is going to cost many more wars and lives for the United States. This is an ideology that gets us involved in some pretty questionable stuff. And for military leaders to take political positions that put rural America and their sons and daughters that form the bedrock of that military in the political crosshairs, it's political and strategic seppuku. It really is. General Milley and Pat Donahoe, they need to get back to being soldiers and stop with the politics. Or maybe they'll lose the support of the only part of America that has always had their back through thick and thin and has always sent its best and brightest to go and fight for freedom. Wokeness hasn't just infected the military, it's everywhere you turn. And when we come back, Will Hild from Consumers Research joins to discuss how to deal with corporate wokery. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's vision of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this summer, Black Rifle Coffee invites you to enjoy your coffee, whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour over or cracking open a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission. Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever summer takes you. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and order yours. Use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase in your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee. Black Rifle Coffee. Well, you can't turn on the television or scroll social media or even watch the Olympics without seeing some kind of corporate wokeism just rub right in your face. One organization's fighting back and calling out companies for their corporate hypocrisy. Will Hild is the executive director of Consumers Research, and he joins me now to discuss how his organization's fighting back against this corporate ridiculousness. Will, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
So there was a quote, I love this because I remember when this happened. When Michael Jordan, it was a story that was written about what you're doing, when Michael Jordan wouldn't endorse a candidate running against Jesse Helms for Senate in 90, he said, well, yeah, Republicans buy sneakers too, which almost seems, you would never hear a reply like that from, like a LeBron James or anybody else. What happened to that sentiment? Why did people choose to go a different path?
Well, the Consumers First Initiative simple message is that these companies are going woke in order to distract from their mistreatment of their customers. So the difference there is Michael Jordan, at the time, Nike, I think, was in a much better place with their issues. I mean, now there's congressional reports coming out that suggest they're using forced labor in China to make their shoes. So, this is a trend that is increased in the last 4 or 5 years. We've seen just an explosion in this strategy by companies, most of whom have real issues, skeletons in their closet that they're trying to distract from.
Yeah, it's and this situation with Nike too, particularly. I don't know anyone that likes Nike anymore, and I'd be interested in seeing just how much of an impact these decisions that they have. Because to me, Will, saying the stuff that they were saying even before Georgia's law passed, but saying the stuff that they were saying while simultaneously having their products that are in their commercials made by people who are in detention camps, a minority in China in a detention camp, seems a little ironic.
Absolutely. I don't think it's an accident. This is a strategy, again, as I said, that you're seeing more and more companies deploy as they're having problems. Take American Airlines, for example, another company that we've targeted. This is an organization that's been rated the nation's worst airline 2 years in a row by the Wall Street Journal. They lose the most bags. They kick the most passengers off of flights involuntarily. And last year, we reached out to them, and they confirmed to us that they've continued to reduce legroom during the COVID pandemic. And of course, this was a period of time in which they got a multi-billion-dollar taxpayer-funded bailout. So they go out and they take positions on election integrity legislation in states like Texas. They're doing this to distract. They're doing this to distract from their mistreatment of their customers, their failures as a business. Since we launched the ads, things have gotten worse at American. They've had to announce that they're moving to save money. They're moving to single agent boarding on many of their flights. And they got caught asking some of their employees to come in and work for free, to volunteer in order to make ends meet. And so, again, they need to be focusing on their customer. They need to be focusing on turning their business around, not trying to cozy up to woke politicians to distract from their CEO Doug Parker's 8-figure paycheck last year.
Yeah, that's a really good point, too. The last time I flew in American, I thought it was odd that I had to wear the mask, still because the virus, everything's super contagious except when it's not. But then the plane was so dirty. There was chunks of food on the seat. I had to re-clean the whole area. Thankfully, I've always done that anyway. So, it's help when you're, a germophobic, anal retentive person. Talking with Will Hild of whose advocacy group has been going off on these woke corporations. Well, not just with Coca-Cola and Nike, and we're talking about American Airlines as well. I know that there's always been advocacy groups that I think even back since I was in school in the 90s, where they would yell at corporations. They would want corporations to act a certain way. You would have boycotts and the like. But companies never really, at least maybe as publicly as they do now, we didn't see them actually kind of focus group testing the direction of their company. and and you didn't see them actually becoming hostile to part of their consumer group, any of their customers based on politics. And that, I just don't know how sustainable something like that is. When did you all kind of notice, I mean, obviously you guys are the experts on this, but when did that really actually become part of like a corporate policy to just really take direction from these groups?
Yeah, you saw a few companies pioneer this, Nike being one of them. Part of the reason I think they've been doing this for so long is they've had labor supply issues for so long. They've had lots of criticism of where they were making their shoes, how they were treating the people that make them. And then I think it just caught on from there. A lot of companies saw the left-wing media cover for Nike, and they said, hey, well, if they can do it, we can do it too. So if you've got a labor issue like Nike does, like for example, Coca-Cola, also strong evidence that they're getting sugar from companies in China that used forced labor. If you've got other issues going on in your companies, mistreatment of your customers, unhealthy products, then this is a great way to get lots of good coverage in Washington Post, New York Times, and mainstream media will cover for you. And many of the issues that normally would be covered by those publications, to criticizing these corporations, those suddenly go away as long as you're willing to cozy up to woke activists and woke politicians. And that's really the simple message of the Consumer First Initiative: is stop trying to cozy up to woke politicians, focus on your customers, focus on fixing your products.
Yeah, we're playing for folks watching on the first, one of the clips that they had was the polar bear holding up the soda saying, "Be less white." I remember when that came out, I'm like, what in the world? That was like their diversity training that they had, be less white. What does this do to people who, and I realize that there's a lot of psychology in marketing, a lot of psychology in advertising. In fact, you could say that it kind of is predicated upon the psychology, understanding consumer habits and behaviors and what attracts people to certain products. And I know that, for instance, Coke and Pepsi used to compete. I just remember all of the ads where they competed against each other to see which cola would be coolest. Kind of the same thing with Apple and IBM. It really was a branding. It was a form of for the customer to really brand themselves and identify without having to tell people. Like if you, where they had the Mac and PC commercials, and the PC guy was the nerdy dude, and the Apple guy was the real cool guy. I mean, people like that branding. They wanted to brand themselves that way. And the same thing goes with like luxury items. People like the status that it confers without them having to tell people. So what does this, would you say that political affiliation now in terms of products, is that also a status now? And is that what they're trying to switch to market?
I wouldn't even think it's as genuine as that. I really don't think this has much to do with, focusing on their bottom line and trying to sell products, as it does trying to cover from the problems that they've got, the use of forced labor. Take Nike again, for example. This is a company that their CEO just got on an investor call, and during the call said that they were a company of China for China. Well, what does that tell you about where they see their priorities? These are American brands, supposedly, like Coca-Cola. Again, you talk about branding. I mean, what company has tried harder to identify itself with the United States than Coca-Cola? And yet they are out cavorting with our frenemy, China. They are the top tier sponsor of the Beijing Olympics, something no less than Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said ought to be boycotted by American companies because of the human rights abuses in China. And it looks like Coca-Cola is benefiting from those human rights abuses. Congressional evidence suggests that they're getting sugar that's been harvested by forced labor. So again, I don't even think it's a matter of, hey, let's have this luxury idea of being a Democrat or something like that in order to sell more Coke. I really think it comes down to, we need to expand in China, that we're cozying up to America's frenemy. As we're a trading partner, but we're obviously a rival of China's. And instead of facing up to that and figuring out which country they're going to be loyal to, they try to have it both ways, and they get coverage from that, from the New York Times, Washington Post, liberal media, liberal woke politicians and activists, by cozying up, by taking these divisive positions on legislation they have no expertise in. They know nothing about running an election. They know it's not germane to their business model. They are simply speaking. In fact, many of the times that they issue statements, they get them factually wrong about what's in the legislation itself. So again, I think this has less to do with the bottom line, except that they don't want to be called out for using forced labor and for selling themselves out, selling out an American mainstay like Coca-Cola to China.
Wow, gosh. We're going to have, I know in the future, lots of discussions about China with regards to foreign policy, everything else, trade. We'll see how it rolls out. And of course, the wokery. Will, Hild, I appreciate what y'all do. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So coming up, Jeremy Adams is author. This is a scary book to me because my kids are fitting into this exactly the demo that he's talking about. Hollowed Out. It is a book that talks about the next generation and really what the past couple of years has done to it. I know, the title itself is terrifying. Keep it here. Jeremy Adams is the author of Hollowed Out, a warning about America's next generation. It comes out next week, and it reveals why students have rejected wisdom, culture, and really a lot of institutions of Western civilization, and what can be done to win them back. Jeremy, it's really good to have you. Thank you for writing this book.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a profoundly important message we need to get out there.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to read for folks just some of what this book gets into, because you talk about how kids, younger kids, are digital hermits, and you're a teacher, you're an educator, so you see this in your classroom, that they have uninformed values, and really what you say is most worrying of all, their humanity, their curiosity stunted, reason underdeveloped, humanity diminished. They have digital hermits of a sort unfamiliar to an older generation. They're not really interested in marriage and family, and they kind of dismiss religion, not interested in patriotism. This is, and I have kids that are exactly in this demo that you're talking about. And I'm always, especially with everything in the past year, and also with all the messages that society is feeding them, I feel like a lot is working on these kids to kind of, just kind of drum down any kind of identity. You wrote this book partly, from what I understand, what you were inspired by seeing these kids return to your classroom. And talk to me about that, because it's a great book. It's a compelling read, very provocative. Tell me a little bit about this, and how why were you brought to write this? Because of the stuff you were witnessing.
No, an amazing question. Most of the time when somebody writes a really ambitious book in our country, where the message is, hey, there is a colossal titanic problem coming our way, that book is usually written by somebody who is famous, or a politician, or a pundit, or a Instagram influencer. But I would tell you, Dana, that if you want to know somebody who has a front row seat to American decline, if you want to know somebody who's in the trenches and sees a lot of disturbing pivots in our society, in our culture, it's not the pundits and the politicians, it's the classroom teachers like myself. I've been in a classroom for almost a quarter of a century, and I'll tell you, the changes I have seen in the last 5 to 10 years are profoundly upsetting. And I giggle a little bit inside because I hear you talking about your own kids. This isn't just me frustrated as Mr. Adams. This is me wanting to scream out loud at my society, saying, stop making it so hard for me to raise my children with traditional values, who love their country and who want to connect themselves to the things that typically lead to a meaningful life. So, there are so many problems that I talk about in the book. But by and large, I think that people who aren't in the classroom don't understand the extent to which young people live their lives today completely untethered to adult values, adult behaviors, adult expectations. They're spending 9 or 10 hours a day on their phones. And what does that mean, Dan? That means they're not reading books. That means they're not dating. They're not going to the movies. They're not going to football games the way that you and I did. I think we're probably a similar age. And you're right about the religion. There's a whole section in there about the fact that it's not just that young people today are rejecting, Christianity or Islam or Hinduism. They don't know anything about it. They're simply ignorant about it. And largely they don't date. Half of all 18 to 35-year-olds today don't have a romantic partner. The desire for marriage and family is in free fall. 1 in 5 millennials say they don't have a friend in the entire world. And, I've made my living teaching political science. I am a unapologetic lover of America. I think the creation of this country was the greatest pivot in the history of the world. And the fact that the young people in my classroom today are the least patriotic Americans in our history bothers me to the depths of my soul. So yes, they are hollowed out, and people from all walks of life, all politics, everybody needs to wake up and realize what's coming our way.
And this has even happened since even before the pandemic. How much, in what you say is interesting, because you talk about the isolationism. We were told that social media was great. It's going to help everybody stay together, stay connected. Not really what we're seeing.
That's a great question. I mean, it's interesting because, most of the research that's in the book all of these disturbing numbers and these alarming statistics were before before the lockdown and before all of this happened. I guarantee there's going to be a deluge of research that talks about their mental health. I mean, something I did mention a moment ago is just how toxic they feel about their own lives. I mean, between 2007 and 2017, teen depression rose 63%. Suicide in children ages 10 to 24 jumped 56%. Again, that's before the pandemic. And so when you look at how young people feel about their own lives, they don't feel connected to the things that traditionally make them happy. And that's my real concern. The name of the book is Hollowed Out. And the reason they're hollowed out is because they don't have the values, the behaviors, and the relationships that typically fill us in and give us a sense of meaning and purpose and making us feel good about ourselves. So I look at my young people, and if there are any teachers out there, they're going to be nodding right now when I use this word, anxiety. That is the word of the time. Our students are filled with anxiety, and that's largely because they don't have a lot of powerful adult relationships mentoring them, teaching them, showing them the way that you and I know is the key to a meaningful life, and for young people to be socialized in a way that leads to really positive outcomes.
Yeah, it's a huge reprogramming, and what it makes me think of too is I remember when I was young, my parents. I remember seeing the PSAs and the news pieces on the 5 o'clock news where they would say, "Oh, parents, don't let the television babysit your kids." It's almost like generationally that the television was swapped out, and now it's like games on your phone, social media, things like that. Do you get that same sense?
I do, but I would tell you that social media is infinitely worse. The devices are infinitely worse than what you and I grew up. I remember there was a book in the 1980s, you remember, it's called Entertaining Yourselves to Death or something like that, about the fact that we're watching too much TV. But the problem is we didn't live in our TV. We didn't interact with our radio. We didn't get our sense of well-being by watching MASH or Gilligan's Island. These young people, it's tough to describe the extent to which they get their orientation of the world through these frivolous memes, these videos, these vines, the scrolling hour after hour after hour. And by the way, what are they watching, Dana? They're watching other kids. And of course, none of those videos are particularly pro-American. They're not about how lucky we have it, how great they are to be living in the United States today. They tend to be snarky. They tend to be negative. And I had to ask my oldest daughter when I started doing all this media for the book, do you mind if I talk about you? Because my daughter and I have profoundly different views of the country. And I know she's getting a lot of this stuff from social media, and it drives me up the wall.
Yeah, no, that is such an important point, because I feel like kids today, they know the YouTube stars more than they know anybody on TV or anybody else in film. Exactly. Or it is a phenomenon. It is very fascinating to watch.
And if I could add something about that, something I've noticed, your point is a good one. Something I noticed when I started teaching political science a long time now, 17, 18 years ago, kids used to talk about how, well, my mom says this about, Bill Clinton, or my dad says this about George W. Bush. Kids used to talk about their parents because their parents influenced them. Nowadays, nobody talks about mom and dad. They talk about, like you said, a YouTube celebrity or a Twitter trendsetter or an Instagram influencer or the latest Vine that they watched, or they're talking about LeBron James or whatever, and kind of conventional influences, the church, the school, the family, friendship. These things are not there to influence them the way that they used to be. I mean, again, at the end of the day, our children are going to absorb their values from somewhere. And because the adults in our society, Dana, have left the building, we all know they're getting them from a place that's not going to lead to a meaningful life and to the maintenance of the American Republic itself.
Yeah, I'm talking to Jeremy Adams here. His book, Hollowed Out, comes next week. Last question for you, Jeremy. So what do we do to fix it?
Well, there's a lot of things we need to do. Just really quickly off the top of my head, the adults have to start adulting again. We have to put ourselves into the spaces of our young people. The other thing we need to do, and this is my political science hat I'm wearing, is young people need to understand that being patriotic does not mean that you think your country was perfect. It is not a declaration of perfection. You can stand for the national anthem. You can say the Pledge of Allegiance and still understand that America has done things that we're not proud about. And in fact, the reason why, the silent generation has a 94% rate of being proud of their history is because we see the progress we've made. And also, I would say the third thing is defend traditional values and aspirations. To be an American is to dream, is to reach, is to believe that nothing stands in your way. Do not let young people think because they have problems that they can't achieve, that those hurdles are insurmountable. You know, as Teddy Roosevelt said, to be an American is to be in the arena of life. We need to get our kids back in the arena.
Oh, that's a great quote. Jeremy Adams, book must read by parents. They can get it next week. They can actually pre-order now, and the book comes out next week. Hollowed Out, Standing Up for the Next Generation. You're doing a great job, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Appreciate your impact in the classroom and with this book.
Thank you.
All right, of course. Coming up, folks, Tucker Carlson over the weekend got verbally attacked in a fly fishing store in Montana on a Friday night. I was like, is there anything that's more random? But there might be more to the story. We'll discuss it next. Stay with us. All right, so no doubt you've seen that verbal assault on Tucker Carlson, right? It occurred in Montana. It came from a man named Dan Bailey. It happened on a Friday night in a fly fishing store in Montana. Take a look. Guy put it up on Instagram.
Don't even get I don't care, man. You are the worst human being known to mankind. I want you to know that what you have done to this state, to the United States, to everything else in this world. I don't care that you're not here. What you've done to people's families, what you have done to everybody else in this world. Son. Don't call me son. One.
Imagine being that guy and your life is so pathetic that you have to flex on Instagram and you make this cringeworthy public spectacle of yourself. Maybe they should put him on the box of Summer's Eve. So, where to begin? Well, at the start of the hour, I talked with you about Commanding General Pat Donahoe in the U.S. Army. He made basically a soft threat to a citizen on Twitter about a disagreement over vaccines and vaccine policy in the military. And here we are. We see a dude, Dan Bailey, who is most certainly on the left, verbally trying to just dress down Tucker Carlson, who's just minding his business in a tackle shop in Montana on a Friday. You notice a pattern? People on the far left, they think it's okay to just lose their ever-loving mind in public with people with whom they disagree. I mean, what happened to, you know how many people I see that, like, if I'm doing business in DC or New York and I disagree with someone and you just kind of shrug and you live your life because we're normal people. So now we only have this video because Beer Belly, Dan Bailey, posted this video of his little verbal tirade. He posted it himself. He was so proud, so proud. I mean, clearly he had someone film this whole thing. How else did he get the film to post it? It's all really weird. Of course, the rotund, yes, I am saying this because I can, Dan Bailey, because he is a man of the left, and the left, they're so much more virtuous and they have so many more morals than we do, feels entitled to get up in Tucker Carlson's face when he's with his family shopping in a tackle shop and call him the worst human being imaginable. Why? Well, because well-fed Dan Bailey is more virtuous and more moral of a human being than Tucker Carlson, apparently, which means he gets to judge Tucker Carlson. It's ironic, right? Given how much progressives talk about inclusion. They don't mean a word of it. It's the bulbous Dan Bailey gets to verbally assault Tucker Carlson because Carlson disagrees with the Biden administration and has taken issue with the coronavirus policies. And of course, as you know, any disagreement with this administration is called misinformation. And if you're guilty of that, it means you can be censored and even bullied by people like the protuberous Dan Bailey. Although it doesn't really seem like Carlson was at all concerned. Now, I could point out many things about this disgusting behavior by one spherical Dan Bailey in Montana. I mean, for one, the left seems to think that his behavior is something to be celebrated. All over the Twitter sphere, Beer Belly Dan Bailey's awful behavior is being applauded by other leftists who also believe themselves to be superior human beings to the rest of us. But you would expect that. And I could point out, as many have, that Dan Bailey looks like the pregnant man emoji, right? He really does. I mean, it's him. Tucker must have felt a little intimidated by, I guess his large, rotund, what are all the adjectives? Protuberous, spherical belly poking him in the chest like that. He looks like Santa. Imagine being on the receiving end of the worst imaginable human being ever as Dan's warm, hairy stomach pressed against you, all delivered perhaps with the hot scent of Keystone Light on Dan Bailey's breath as he invaded Carlson's personal space for at least 30 seconds straight. I mean, all of this is worth pointing out, but here's another interesting thing that some have pointed out online. Belly bully Dan Bailey seems to have connections to the CIA. Some people on the internet, of course they did, they went digging and they found this. While in Mongolia in 2007, Dan Bailey worked for the Asia Foundation, which has ties to the CIA, and by ties I mean funding. Now, and it also says that it's a proprietary of the CIA. Now, just kind of interesting, Dan Bailey happened to be in a fly fishing store in Montana to confront Tucker Carlson on camera, right on the heels of Carlson calling out the NSA for spying on him, which has been proven, and Carlson was unmasked, which is an ethics and potential legal violation by someone in the NSA. Now, make of all of this what you will, but we do think it's kind of strange. We also think that if Dan Bailey really is, I don't know, some guy embedded with the CIA, maybe they need a better health regimen for its peeps, because I'm not really confident that you could fight anyone, much less communists like that. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night and don't bend the knee.